The prairie wind screamed like a dying man the moment the stranger fell off his horse and hit the muddy river bank, and that was the sound that made Elira Rowan lift her rifle. For a long heartbeat, she stood perfectly still in the tall grass, her breath held tight in her chest. The Red Fork River churned angrily below, swollen from 3 nights of relentless rain. Lightning slashed across the sky, turning everything silver for a blink, the grass, the river, and the body half submerged near the rocks. He wasn't moving. Elira blinked water out of her eyes. She'd been tracking a lost calf across the south range of her small, hard-earned homestead. She had expected a terrible storm. She had expected maybe coyotes. She had not expected a man, especially not one who looked like he'd been carved from stone and dropped directly into the river. She moved closer. The stranger was tall, broad-shouldered, long black hair plastered to his face. Tribal paint faded and smeared from the water marked his cheekbones. A thick leather strap crossed his chest and held a knife sheath, the blade still tucked inside. His skin, bronze and powerful even in cold rain, glinted with river water. A Comanche. Elira's stomach tightened. Her father had been killed by a raiding band 5 years ago. She never learned which group, never asked questions out of fear she wouldn't like the answers. But the ache still lived in her bones. Trusting one of them, she thought, would be like trusting a rattlesnake to watch a baby. But this man, whatever else he was drowning. Elira lowered her rifle. "Damn it," she muttered. "Don't you die on my land." She slung the rifle across her back and waded knee-deep into the ice-cold river. The current nearly knocked her over, but she grabbed the man under his arms and strained with everything she had. He was at least 200 pounds of muscle and bad decisions. Mud sucked at her boots. Her spine felt like it was cracking. But he coughed once, water sputtering from his mouth, and she dug deeper. "Good," she grunted. "That means you're not dead yet. Don't make me drag a corpse. I'm tired." The man didn't respond, not that she expected him to. His head lolled when she finally heaved him onto the bank. He lay still on the grass, chest barely rising. Then lightning flashed again, illuminating something that made her pulse trip, a gash along his ribs, deep swollen, and already turning the ugly color of a wound that had been festering. Something had cut him days ago, maybe longer. The river had washed the blood away, but the damage was unmistakable. He needed help now. Real help. She glanced around the empty, storm-torn prairie. Her homestead was almost a mile away. If she left him here, he would die. If she took him home, someone might see a Comanche man under her roof, and gossip traveled fast. Gossip became trouble even faster. But the very simple truth was this: she could not just leave him to die. Elira pressed her fingers to his throat. Faint pulse, weak, but present. "You picked the wrong woman to fall in front of today," she said softly. "I don't leave people behind, even if they're trouble." The river surged louder beside her, as if arguing. She braced herself, grabbed him by the arms, and began dragging him through the mud toward home. Her cabin sat at the edge of a cottonwood grove, small, weather-beaten, and lonely. She'd built half of it with her own hands, and the other half under the guidance of her late husband, Matthew. He had died 3 years ago from a rattlesnake bite before sunrise could bring a doctor. The cabin still smelled faintly of him, especially when storms blew through. Tonight, though, all Elira smelled was smoke from her struggling fire and wet earth clinging to her boots as she dragged the stranger inside. The world thundered outside. Rain pounded the roof. The fire crackled weakly, its light flickering across the man's unmoving body as she laid him on a fur blanket. Elira knelt beside him, breathing hard. "Let's see what mess you've brought into my life." She peeled away the wet leather strap, set his knife aside, then hesitated. His shirt, if it could be called that, was torn so badly it barely clung to him. He was freezing, hypothermic. She could feel the shaking beneath his skin. And the wound, God, it was worse than she thought. A slash, jagged and angry, rimmed with dark infection. "We have to get this off you," she murmured. She didn't even realize she'd spoken aloud until her hands froze hovering above the knots that held what was left of his shirt to his body. Having another man inside her home, undressing him. It twisted something deep inside her, something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. But he groaned, a low, agonized sound, and the hesitation vanished. "This isn't for modesty. This is survival." She sliced the rest of the shirt away with her small belt knife. The fabric fell apart in damp chunks. His chest was powerful, scarred in ways that told stories she didn't know how to read: knife marks, arrow grazes, burns. Each mark had weight. Elena swallowed. "Who are you?" No answer. She checked the wound again. It wasn't an ordinary cut. It looked like a blade that had been dipped in something. Poisoned? She had no idea. But she knew one thing. He had been running for a long time. She cleaned it with hot water and crushed sage, the only herb she had left after harsh winter storage. The man jolted under her touch, eyes flickering open for a brief, sharp second. Dark eyes. Deep, wild, but not hostile, just confused, pained. "You're all right," she said quickly. "You're safe, but you need to stay still." His lips parted. A rasp of breath left him. "Elena!" She froze. "What? You know my name?" But his eyes rolled shut again, unconscious. It sent a shiver down her spine. No. You don't get to drop a mystery like that and pass out." She finished cleaning the wound, wrapped it tightly with strips of her own spare shirt, then set a heavy wool blanket over him. The storm rattled the windows. The cabin groaned. Elena sat back, wiping sweat from her brow. She'd brought a strange Comanche warrior into her home. She'd undressed him, treated him, saved him. And she had absolutely no idea what danger she'd just invited in. A stranger with secrets. Hours passed. The storm quieted. Elena stayed awake, sitting in her rocking chair with her rifle across her lap. She watched the stranger's chest rise and fall. Occasionally he muttered in a language she didn't understand, Comanche, no doubt. Sometimes he cried out as if fighting someone in his dreams. Once he whispered a name, Chuma. Elena didn't know if that was a person, a place, or a ghost. At dawn, the rain stopped. A faint gold light filled the cabin. Elena checked the wound again. The swelling had gone down a little. Not much, but enough to give her hope. She slipped her hand under his jaw, feeling his temperature. Warmer, breathing steadier. Still alive. "That's good," she whispered. Then his eyes opened fully, dark, intense, sharp as fresh-honed steel. He stared at her for a long, unblinking moment. Elena's heartbeat quickened. She tightened her grip on her rifle, not aiming it, but holding it ready. He spoke first. "You saved me." His voice was deep, quiet, gravel-edged, strong even in weakness. "I did," Elena replied. "Might regret it later. Haven't decided yet." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, except his face was too serious for that softness. He looked around the cabin, taking everything in. His gaze landed on the bandages across his ribs. "You touched my wounds. Had to. You removed my clothes. You were freezing." His eyes returned to her, searching, measuring. Finally he said, "I am not your enemy." Elena swallowed. "Maybe, or maybe I just don't know enough yet." He nodded slowly, accepting that answer. Then he whispered a sentence that made the air turn still. "Men are coming for me." Her blood ran cold. "Coming here?" "Yes." She stiffened, rifle already raised. "How many?" "Enough." He breathed in sharply, then added, "And if they find me under your roof, they will kill you too." Elena stared at him, heart pounding as the sun continued to rise outside. What had she just dragged into her home? The man's gaze locked onto hers. "My name," he said hoarsely, "is Rafe." He paused. "And before this day ends, you and I both may have to fight to stay alive." The flames had only begun to die when Elira realized the fire wasn't meant to kill her, only to warn her, and that knowledge chilled her more than the desert night ever could. The smell of burned timber drifted like a ghost across the clearing, twisting into her throat until she could barely breathe. Sparks lifted into the dark sky like tiny souls fleeing the world. Ronan appeared out of the tree line with the quiet force of a storm gathering. His stallion's rein swung low in his hand, and the fire's glow sharpened the lines of his jaw, his shoulders. The set of his eyes, the eyes of a man who'd lived too long between two worlds and trusted neither. "Elira," he said, voice low, taut. "Someone wanted me to see this." She swallowed hard. Marshal Pike has a way of making his messages loud. Ronan crouched at a blackened post. Elira watched him brush ash aside until his fingers hit a deep mark carved into the wood. A petit circle with a single line cutting through the center. She felt him stiffen in a way that made her heart twist. "You know that symbol," she murmured. Ronan stood slowly, the flames dancing across his face like flickering grief. "It's Comanche," he answered. "But it's not mine." Before she could ask more, a soft crack echoed from the woods. Ronan moved instantly, one arm sweeping her behind him. She felt the tension coil in him like a bowstring pulled tight. A figure stepped into the firelight with a predator's calm stride lean, sharp-eyed, wearing bone jewelry and a wolf pelt over his shoulder. Long black hair braided. A smirk carved into his mouth like it had been born there. Silas Crow. Ronan's entire body locked, and something raw flashed across his face. "Silas," he said, tone flat, unreadable. Silas cocked his head. "Brother," Elira blinked. "Brother?" Ronan had never once mentioned family, but Ronan shifted subtly in front of her, as if the past were something that could bite. "You carved that mark," Ronan said. Silas rolled a shoulder. "Yeah, and I lit the fire. Pike paid well to flush you out." Elira's stomach tightened as though someone had tied a rope around her ribs. Pike paid him? That meant the marshal wasn't far, and Silas wasn't here for conversation. "What does Pike want?" she asked. Silas looked at her with wolfish amusement. "You, and the map you stitched into that coat hem of yours." Her hand flew to her coat without thinking, and the shame burned hotter than the fire beside them. She hadn't told Ronan about the map. The map people killed for. The map someone had already tried to steal from her more than once. Ronan turned his head, disappointment flickering across his eyes, but he said nothing. Silas stepped backward toward the trees. "Marsh'll meet you at Lone Mesa Creek by sunrise. Come peaceful, or next time I burn the woman instead of the shack." Then he vanished, swallowed by the darkness. Ronan stared after him long after he was gone. His fists clenched, chest rising and falling hard. The fire hissed and popped behind them, collapsing a beam. "This is because of me," Elira whispered, voice trembling. "This is because of Pike," Ronan said sharply. Silas wouldn't be doing this unless Pike owned him. Elira hesitated, then touched Ronan's arm. "Your brother." He stepped away. "He is not my brother anymore." The words cut like broken glass. They rode before the fire finished dying, tearing across the frozen plains under a moon bright enough to paint the grass silver. Wind slapped Elira's face until it stung, but she didn't complain. Not when the world behind them was turning more dangerous by the hour. "How long have you had the map?" Ronan asked suddenly, voice nearly lost to the wind. 3 months, she answered softly. And you didn't tell me. Because people kill for it, she said. And because I wasn't sure you trusted me. Ronan slowed his horse. The night quieted around them. I trust you more than you realize, he said. The simple confession struck deeper than she expected. The horizon lightened to gray as they approached Lone Mesa. Maeve Dalton's tavern sat like a weather-beaten guardian near the cliffs, smoke drifting from its chimney. Ronan dismounted first. We may not have long. Pike's men patrol these ridges. Then why stop? Elira asked. Because Jonah sees everything from the stables, he said. If Pike passed this way, the boy knows. Inside the tavern, Maeve was polishing glasses with calm precision, but her eyes were tired, watchful. When she saw Ronan, worry and a splash of exasperated affection crossed her face. You look like you tangled with a tornado and lost. Good to see you too, he replied. Then Maeve's gaze shifted to Elira, her burnt sleeves, her soot-smudged face, the tremble she couldn't quite hide. Oh, honey, Maeve whispered. Come warm yourself. Elira sank near the stove. The warmth seeped into her bones, and for a moment she felt safe. Only a moment. Marshal Pike came through here 2 hours ago, Maeve said, voice low. He wasn't alone. Ronan's attention sharpened. How many? 6 men. And a Comanche with him. Elira knew. Silas. Maeve handed Ronan a folded note. His jaw tightened as he read it. Bring the woman and the map. Lone Mesa Creek. Noon, or I burn the town next. Elira's breath caught. Everyone here. Because of me? He'll burn them alive? No, Ronan said. He'll burn them to punish me. Maeve grabbed Ronan's arm. Run, both of you. Don't you dare look back. Before Ronan could answer, hard knocking shook the tavern door. Thump, thump, thump. Elira flinched. Maeve paled. That ain't Jonah's knock, she whispered. Ronan moved like lightning, pulling Elira away from the open floor as Maeve slipped a hand toward the rifle under the bar. The knocks came again, sharper, urgent. Ronan cracked the door, knife in hand. Jonah Briggs stumbled inside, panting, mud caked to his boots. Ronan, he gasped. Pike's men, 4 of them, coming up the south ridge. They're almost here. Ronan grabbed his shoulders. Who were they dragging? You said someone looked hurt. Jonah swallowed. A man with long hair. Looked Comanche. Looked like your brother. Elira's breath caught. Silas? Hurt? Maeve muttered a curse under her breath. Pike's using him, same as always. Men like him don't keep allies. They keep leverage. Ronan looked away, pain flickering across his normally controlled face. He's still my blood, he murmured. He betrayed you, Elira said gently. Ronan closed his eyes briefly, breathing deep. Pike twists every man he touches. Maybe Silas never had a choice. Outside, boots crunched in the snow. Jonah's eyes widened in fear. They're here. Ronan seized Elira's arm. Cellar, now. They ducked through the trapdoor Maeve shoved open. She slammed it behind them and dragged barrels across it. Voices thundered upstairs. Greyhawk was here. Pike barked. Search the place. Elira trembled in the dark cellar, listening to furniture slam, glass shatter, boots stomp. Ronan reached blindly for her hand. She found his in the darkness. His fingers squeezed gently, a silent vow. What do we do? She whispered. We get to the creek, Ronan said. Before noon. This ends today. For you. For Silas. For everyone Pike torments. His face was close, shadow softening his features, making him look both fierce and heartbreakingly human. She didn't realize she'd leaned closer until she felt his breath against her forehead. Maeve slid open a hidden panel at the back of the tavern, revealing a narrow escape path. Jonah was already outside with their horses. "I'll lead them south," he said. "Give you time." "You're brave, boy," Ronan said. "Too brave for this land." Jonah only nodded. Elira mounted quickly, adrenaline shaking through her limbs. "Where are we going?" she asked. Ronan's eyes fixed on the distant ridge, where the sun was rising like a blade being drawn. "To Lone Mesa Creek," he said. He nudged his horse forward. "Pike wants a reckoning." Ronan's jaw hardened. "He'll get one." They rode fast, the cold wind tearing past them, the sky brightening into a harsh, unforgiving blue. Behind them, danger pressed in like a closing fist. Ahead, the creek waited with Silas bleeding, Pike watching, and the map's terrible secret finally ready to unfold. The sun was only halfway up when Elira saw the first curl of smoke rising from the direction of Lone Mesa Creek, and her pulse stumbled in her throat. Smoke meant someone was already there. Smoke meant Pike had beaten them. Ronan's horse slowed beside hers. His dark hair whipped across his face as he scanned the horizon with the sharp, instinctive calm of a man who'd spent years learning to read danger in dust and wind. "He's close," Ronan said. "How can you tell?" Elira whispered. Ronan didn't look at her. "Because the land feels wrong, quiet, like something's waiting to break." A shiver crept along the back of her neck. The creek, normally a winding line of glittering water, now glinted like polished steel under the cold sun. A solitary crow perched on a dead cottonwood branch, watching them like a silent omen. They dismounted behind a ridge where sagebrush grew thick enough to hide them. Ronan crouched low, studying the creek bed below. Elira followed his gaze. 2 horses were tied to a fallen log near the water. One belonged to Marshal Pike, his saddle gleamed, his rifle strapped behind it like a threat waiting to be claimed. The second horse, smaller, carried dark beads braided into its reins. Silas's. Ronan's shoulders tensed. "He's hurt," he murmured. Jonah said they dragged him. "Look at how the horse is standing, it's nervous." "Been left too long." Elira touched his arm gently. "If Pike hurt him, why bring him here?" Ronan didn't respond. His jaw tightened instead, his emotions tucked deep behind the stone mask he wore like armor. He motioned for her to stay low as they moved along the ridge, closer to the creek. Each step crackled over frozen grass, every sound feeling too loud, too dangerous. Elira's breath came in tight, shaky bursts. Then she saw him. Silas lay on his side near the water, wrists bound, one leg twisted wrong. Bruises darkened his jaw and temple. Blood streaked the dirt around him. But he was alive. Ronan's entire body seemed to freeze at the sight. His breath hitched. For a heartbeat, Elira saw the boy he must have once been, the one who trusted Silas, who followed him, who believed in him. Then the moment shattered. A gun clicked behind them. "You step 1 inch closer, Greyhawk," Marshal Pike's voice growled, "and I'll blow your damn spine out." Elira turned slowly. Pike stood 10 paces away, rifle leveled at Ronan's back. His dusty coat flapped in the wind, and the early sun carved deep shadows into the hollows of his face. Behind Pike, 2 of his men flanked him, revolvers drawn. Elira felt the world narrow into a knife's edge. Pike nodded at her. "You brought the girl. Good. Saves me some trouble." Ronan didn't move. He didn't even blink. "Let Silas go. This is between you and me." Pike laughed, stepping closer. "Between us?" "No, Greyhawk. This is about what's owed." "Owed?" Elira asked, voice trembling but sharp. "You already torched my cabin. What else do you think you're owed?" Pike's cold eyes flicked to her. You've been walking around with a map people would slit throats to get, and you didn't think anyone would come collecting? Ronan's jaw tightened. You burned her home. Pike shrugged. Needed leverage. Fires are persuasive. He jabbed the barrel of his rifle toward the creek. Now both of you down. Nice and slow. We're finishing this at the water. Ronan moved as ordered, but Elira felt the tension rolling off him. He was calculating, searching, waiting for an opening. Pike was too confident, too sure he'd won. They walked down the ridge, Pike and his men close behind. Silas's head lifted weakly as they approached, his eyes glassy. Brother, Silas croaked. But Ronan didn't speak. Didn't dare. Pike wanted tension, wanted emotion, wanted control. Sit, Pike ordered. Ronan and Elira lowered themselves near Silas. Ronan's hand brushed Silas's shoulder in a silent acknowledgement. Silas winced but nodded, sensing words weren't safe. Pike paced in front of them like a vulture selecting the best piece of meat. Hand over the map. Elira swallowed. Her hand hovered at the seam of her coat. Ronan whispered, Don't. Pike lifted his rifle and pointed it straight at Silas's head. Elira froze. Do it, Pike said. Or I put your friend out of his misery. Something in Ronan broke. Leave him out of it. I'll give you whatever you want. Elira felt her chest tighten. Ronan filled each word with a weight. She'd never heard from him before. Loyalty, pain, love twisted in the shape of brotherhood. Pike's lip curled. Finally. Some good sense. Elira's heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't let Pike take the map, not when she didn't even know its true purpose. Not when she'd already seen what men did to possess it. She glanced at Ronan, their eyes locked. And in that single, silent moment, she knew. They had a chance. A dangerous one. But a chance. Elira slowly reached for the thread inside her coat hem, the one she'd sewn carefully months ago. She tugged. The fabric gave way. Pike grinned. But what Elira pulled out wasn't the full map. Just a piece. A decoy she'd created after one too many close calls. Ronan understood instantly. Elira held the scrap of parchment up with trembling fingers. Here, Pike snatched it greedily. And for the first time since they'd arrived, Ronan moved. He lunged sideways, grabbed Silas, and rolled them both toward the riverbed. Pike fired. The gunshot shattered the air. Dirt burst inches from Ronan's boot. One of Pike's men ran for the decoy map. Elira didn't think she acted. She grabbed a fistful of dirt and threw it straight into the man's eyes. He cursed, blinded, firing wildly. The bullet cracked into a rock, splintering stone. Ronan dragged Silas behind a fallen tree. Elira! He shouted. Move! She ducked just as Pike shot at her, the bullet whizzing past her ear. She scrambled toward the tree, heart pounding so violently she could barely breathe. Pike roared, Stop running! But they didn't. All three dove behind the fallen tree as another gunshot tore through a branch. Silas groaned, clutching his leg. Ronan, I'm sorry. I shouldn't Save your breath, Ronan rasped, tearing cloth from his shirt to tie Silas's wound. You have time to explain later. Pike advanced, boots crunching over dead leaves. You think a log's gonna save you? I can wait. I can always wait. Elira's hands shook, but she forced herself to breathe. We can't stay here. No, Ronan said. We can't. He peeked over the tree. Pike stood exposed on the ridge above them, but his men were spreading out, circling. Ronan's voice dropped to a whisper filled with urgency. Elira, listen carefully. There's a ravine 10 paces to our left. When I say go, you and Silas run for it. What about you? She whispered. I'll cover you. No. Elira grabbed his arm. Her voice cracked. "You can't take on 3 armed men alone." His eyes softened in a way that terrified her more than any bullet. "Elira, if Pike gets that map, every settlement from here to Red Canyon will burn. We can't let him walk out of this creek alive." Pike's shout echoed. "Greyhawk! Last chance." Ronan inhaled once sharp, steady. Then he met Elira's eyes. "Trust me." She did, completely, terrifyingly. "Go!" he shouted. Ronan shot from behind the tree, drawing Pike's fire. Silas stumbled with Elira's help toward the ravine. Bullets cracked the air. Ronan rolled behind another rock, dust exploding around him. Pike cursed. "Kill them." Elira dragged Silas up the slope, breath tearing out of her lungs. A shot rang out. Silas cried out, buckling. "Elira!" Ronan shouted. She turned and saw Pike raising his rifle again, aiming right at her. Ronan tackled Pike a heartbeat before he pulled the trigger. The 2 men crashed into the dirt, rolling, fists flying, every strike fueled by years of hatred. Pike slammed his elbow into Ronan's jaw. Ronan drove his knee into Pike's ribs. Dust and blood twisted around them. Silas groaned beside Elira. "He'll kill him. Pike'll kill him." Elira looked at Ronan, outnumbered, exhausted, fighting like a man whose soul was on the line. She made a decision, a terrifying one. She reached for Silas's dropped knife and ran straight toward the fight. "If you want, I will immediately continue with..." Ronan felt the world tilt sideways as he hit the ground hard, the marshal's bullet grazing his ribs, but he pushed himself up before the dust settled. Elira screamed his name, her voice raw with fear, and that single sound snapped him back into the fight. The canyon wall shook with gunfire. Silas Crow sprinted behind a split boulder, reloading with a quick, practiced sweep of his hands. Maeve, trembling but furious, fired wildly toward the ridge where 2 of Marshal Pike's men crouched. Jonah, breathless and pale, ducked behind a fallen log, clutching a rifle much too long for his thin arms. Ronan's vision narrowed to the marshal standing tall, coat whipping in the wind, pistol steady as if the chaos around him were nothing more than a summer afternoon. "You should have stayed buried in your past, Greyhawk," Pike shouted. "Wasn't meant for men like you to rise back up." Elira stepped forward, pulling Ronan's arm, trying to drag him into cover. "You're bleeding. Later," he said, voice clipped with pain and purpose. "Stay low." But she didn't stay low, not really. Elira never did what fear wanted her to do. She kept her body pressed behind a boulder, but her eyes tracked Pike with sharp focus, her hand gripping Ronan's spare revolver with a determination that made his chest ache. Another bullet sparked off the stone beside her. "Ronan!" she gasped. He grabbed her shoulders, pulled her flush against him, shielding her as more shots cracked through the canyon. The impact of danger, the closeness of her, hit him hard enough to disrupt his breath. "We end this," he whispered. "Elira!" Maeve yelled from across the clearing. "These bastards ain't quitting." Ronan moved first. He charged toward a narrow gap where 2 of Pike's men advanced, firing low to keep their heads down. Silas rose from behind his rock like a phantom, taking out one of the shooters with a shot so clean it barely echoed. The marshal snarled. "Damn traitor!" Silas smirked. "Never was yours to claim, Pike." The marshal fired at him. Silas dove, the bullet burying itself in stone. Jonah, shaking hard but trying to be brave, crawled toward Elira. Miss Elira, what do we do?" She squeezed his arm. "You stay behind that log, Jonah, no matter what. You hear me? You stay down." The boy nodded, tears streaking dust on his cheeks. Ronan sprinted across the clearing, pain slashing through his side, but he kept moving. Pike's men were faltering, their formation scattered. For the first time, Ronan saw uncertainty in the marshal's eyes. And that was new. Pike prided himself on never doubting. Ronan fired, knocking a rifle from one outlaw's hands. The man cursed and fled into the rocks. Only Pike remained at the center, breath clouding in the cold canyon air, rage simmering. Elira saw an opening. Ronan saw something else danger she hadn't yet noticed. "Elira, no!" he shouted, but she didn't hear. She rose from cover and fired at Pike, the bullet slicing past his shoulder. The marshal's eyes snapped to her, and he fired. Ronan threw himself in front of her, grabbing her waist, wrenching her to the ground. The bullet slammed into the earth where she had been standing, scattering shards of shale over them both. Elira stared at him, breathless, eyes wide and drowning in something between fury and gratitude. "You can't keep throwing yourself in front of me, Ronan." "I will," he said. "Every time." Maeve screamed, "Look out." A shadow moved above another gunman Pike had hidden on the ridge. But Silas was faster. He shot the man clean off the ledge. The body tumbled, sliding down the rock face in a limp heap. Silas shouted, "Ronan, finish it." Ronan rose, steady now despite the pain tearing at his side. Pike saw him coming and steadied his own gun. The canyon went quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "You always thought you were better than the men who made you," Pike growled. "Thought you could break free of what you were." "I did break free," Ronan said. "No, you just traded one leash for another." The marshal's gaze cut toward Elira, then back to Ronan. "She be your ruin." Ronan's eyes hardened. "She's my choice." Pike fired. The shot rang like a thunderclap. Ronan staggered. Elira screamed, "Ronan!" But he didn't fall. He lifted his gun, steady as stone, and fired once. The bullet hit Pike square in the chest. The marshal's smug expression collapsed. He fumbled for balance, eyes widening in disbelief as he dropped to his knees. Ronan took a step toward him, chest heaving, blood leaking down his side, but his stance unwavering. "You hunted my people. You hunted me. You will hunt no more." The marshal toppled forward and hit the ground dead. Silas blew out a breath he might have been holding for years. Maeve sagged against a rock, shaking her head. Jonah let out a sob of relief, of release, of something he didn't yet have words for. Elira ran to Ronan, cupping his face with both hands, tears streaking her dust-covered cheeks. "You're hit," she whispered. "So are you," he said, brushing his thumb over a cut on her forehead. She laughed weakly. "This is nothing." "You're something," he breathed. The moment stilled between them, quiet, fragile, powerful. Silas walked over, rifle slung over his back. "Brother, we need to get you bandaged before you fall over." Ronan cracked a tired half-smile. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding enough to paint the canyon," Silas replied dryly. "Stop pretending." Maeve joined them, giving Elira a proud nod. "You were damn brave." "Reckless but brave." Elira squeezed Ronan's hand. "We need to get back to Lone Mesa. Jonah needs rest and Ronan needs a doctor." Jonah wiped his nose, nodding. "I ain't leaving you two." "No one's leaving anyone," Ronan said. Silas crossed his arms. "What now?" Ronan looked at the open canyon mouth where Pike's reign of terror had ended, where so many of their paths had collided and twisted. "Now," Ronan said slowly, "we go home." The journey back to Lone Mesa was slow. Ronan leaned on Silas when he had to, though he hated it. Elira stayed close, watching his every step, every wince, every breath. When the town came into view, Jonah let out a shaky laugh. "I never thought I'd see it again." Maeve wrapped an arm around him. "You did good, kid." "Reckless, but good." The townsfolk poured out onto the dusty road as they approached. Whispers swelled. Eyes widened. Someone shouted, "Is that Marshal Pike?" "Dead," Silas said plainly. And the whispers turned into cheers. People clapped Ronan on the back, hugged Elira, lifted Maeve off the ground. Jonah grinned through tears as two ranch hands hoisted him onto their shoulders. But Elira didn't celebrate. She turned to Ronan, who stood a little apart from the crowd, breathing hard, eyes scanning the faces as if unsure he belonged among them. "Come with me," she said. He followed her to the tavern porch, where the world felt quieter. "You saved all of us," she said. "But I need to know something." Ronan stiffened. "What?" She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "When you pulled me out of that river, when you stripped off my wet clothes to keep me alive, when you faced Pike alone, was it just duty?" His jaw tightened. "No, then what was it?" He reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It was everything I've tried not to feel," he said. "Everything I thought I wasn't allowed to want." Her breath hitched. "And what do you want, Ronan Greyhawk?" He leaned in, forehead slowly resting against hers. "You," Elira exhaled shakily, her hands gripping the front of his shirt. Then she kissed him. Not soft, not hesitant, but alive, fierce, full of everything the desert had taken from both of them and everything they had fought to keep. Ronan pulled her closer, one hand in her hair, the other on her waist, as though anchoring himself to the moment. When they finally parted, breathless, she whispered, "So what now?" He smiled, slow and unguarded. "Now we rebuild, together." Silas cleared his throat from a few feet away. "Hate to interrupt, but the doc is ready to stitch you before you bleed out on her doorstep." Ronan didn't let go of her hand. He didn't even try. "Then let's go," he said. Elira squeezed his fingers. And for the first time in years, Ronan Greyhawk walked toward the future without looking back, because the only thing worth facing was right beside him. The story ends with Lone Mesa washed in golden evening light, the shadows finally lifting, the danger gone, and two souls battered but unbroken finding the one thing the Old West rarely gave, a chance to stay, a chance to choose, a chance to live, together, if you'd like.